Hello, my name is Laura Keenan, and I am the Governance and Management Consultant for the Vermont Department of Libraries. Thank you for joining me for this training. My focus in this training will be community needs assessments, strategic planning, and advocacy. I put all three of these in one training because I feel like they are interwoven strands of the same movement towards connecting with our community and making sure that the library's mission and plan, both in terms of its strategic plan and its advocacy, reflect the expressed needs of the community. So how do you know if your library meets the needs of its patrons and its community? And I believe that assessing the needs of your community is an integral part of all of the planning the library does, but especially your strategic plan. I believe they go hand in hand. The department doesn't teach a specific strategic planning method. Our goals or our priorities for you is that you create a plan that engages the community in some way, whatever that means, whatever your capacity is, both for the board and the community itself, and that the resulting plan is something that is useful and will actually be used by the board and by the director to lead the library forward. So we don't want you to spend a lot of time and effort creating a plan that just sits on the shelf and no one looks at. We want it to be a document of some sort or a plan of some sort that you use to move forward and that meets the expressed needs of your community. So one of the ways to figure out the needs of your community is through this initial information gathering, which can be done now or at any time that you have the capacity to gather information. And we focus mainly on looking at what else has been done in terms of community needs assessments by others in the community, connecting with the select board to see what's been done by them, by other towns, departments. Um, and other organizations in town, but also looking at what you can learn from census data. So when you think about what other local groups have done in terms of community needs assessments or surveys recently, has a town plan been done within the past few years that you can look at and learn from and build off from? Or have any other departments in town done some sort of needs assessment or survey? Or any other nonprofit, civic, or religious organization? And again, what have they learned that you can build from? And how can you respect the work that's already been done and move forward from that so that you're not reinventing the wheel or asking the same question that was asked last year of the community? If it was done 5 years ago, the answers may be very different. If it was done last year, the answer still might be different, but you want to respect work that's been done before and build off that. In terms of census data, there is the American Community Survey, which is done about every 5 years as an increment sampling of census data for smaller towns. It dives deeper than regular census data. And I put up here the contact information for Michael Mosier, who works at the UVM Center for Rural Studies. Michael, like me, is a bit of a data geek. He loves talking about data, the context for data, and making meaning from data. So I encourage you to reach out to him if you're looking at the American Community Survey to understand what that says about your community and how you might use that to help inform your planning. Now, when I talk about community engagement, I talk a lot about the importance of turning outward. A few years ago, I was trained in the Harwood Institute method, and they focus a lot on as library board and director and staff, we have an expert knowledge, which is really important to our library. And as we do strategic planning, it is vitally important that we turn outward from that expert knowledge, use that, but use that to engage with our community and figure out the public community knowledge that can help guide us forward so that when we create a strategic plan, we're creating one that is guided by the expressed needs of our community and there's some sense of ownership by the community in that plan because they participated with us actively and meaningfully in creating the plan. Part of doing that is really doing a systematic assessment of what groups exist in our town and where do people gather. And so I encourage the board to sit down and systematically list out all the different organizations, groups, social, civic, religious, that meet in town, and places that people used to gather. Now during the pandemic, maybe the gathering isn't happening, but still listing those out so that you can have a really thorough, exhaustive list of everything that happens in town, and then go through the board members and figure out who has connections to each one of these organizations or places. that can go talk to folks and learn what they envision for their community. Or if the board isn't connected to a certain group organization, does anyone on the board know anyone who is that can help make the introduction, or who might be willing to partner with the board in gathering information from these groups? But again, the board is only so connected. So really figuring out what pieces you're missing and actively pursuing input from those folks too is really important, because the library exists to serve the entire community, not just the people we happen to be connected to. So once you've identified all these groups and organizations and places, how do you find out your community's needs? Well, focus groups may be a way to do it. There may even be a way to do it during this time of the pandemic. If you have the people with the skills, the knowledge to do this, or if you've successfully done it in the past, that can be a really powerful way to bring together specific segments of the population to discuss what the community needs. You can also do it through surveys, although I caution you with surveys, they can't get as deep as conversations. You can get some data, but again, it's limited what you can get. So surveys can be useful for certain types of information gathering and for certain types of efforts, but not others. So if you have questions about that, I encourage you to reach out to me and we can talk about that. Going out into the community, grocery stores, coffee shops, farmers markets, community events, being a part of those, having a booth, engaging with people can be a really important way to get out into the community where people are at. And going to those community meetings too, getting yourself invited, speaking, joining them, really listening deeply to what they think the community needs. But in all of these areas, the real question is, what questions are you asking to solicit information from folks? How do you ask those questions to get the best information? And who is going to do it in each one of these arenas? Because sometimes the person doing the asking is just as important as what is asked. It depends on, who knows who and relationships in your community. So when you go to ask about what the community needs, I specifically emphasize that you should be assessing the current and future needs of the community as a whole rather than just the library. And I feel like this is really important, because when you ask people what they think the library needs to be doing, the type of answers you get tend to not be as helpful as you'd hope. People tend to answer what you're already doing or tend to answer what they think you want to hear. And it may not give you any good insights into future directions for the library in terms of planning. And so I encourage you to think about using the Harwood Institute method. I've got some tools that I link to in these slides to really think a bigger picture and think, what do people envision for a good community? What is it that they really want? And solicit those types of conversations, and why do people think that that's important, and how is that different from the way the community currently is? Have those sort of deeper conversations that the Harwood method talks about, to dive deep. And as you start doing this, and I encourage you before you do that to really connect with movers and shakers in town, be that the select board, the town administrators, to let them know you're doing this so that they don't think you're stepping on their toes, but that you really are trying to figure out what the community needs and how the library can partner in that. The answers that you get as you ask these questions, some of them are going to be answers that, as you guys as a board talk about it, realize that they really can be addressed by the library. These needs can be addressed, given the library's limitations in terms of staff and budget. These needs actually really make sense for the library to engage with, given the makeup and context of your community. Some of them will go into a different column. So some of them are definitely the library should be engaged with. Some of them are things that the library probably should engage with, but with someone else as a partnership, because they may fall in the area of expertise of this other person, but you have the people coming to the library. How can their expertise and your expertise be married to speak to the community knowledge of what is actually needed? And in doing that, you can create advocates with other organizations. And then the third bucket will be things that the library probably shouldn't be involved in, and you will determine that, but you'll be a good steward of information and give that information, what you've learned, to folks who could actually do something with that. And again, you'll be forming library advocates that way too, because you are shuttling what you've learned to people who might be able to do something about it. And determining which bucket each of these fall into is part of the strategic planning process and part of your visioning process. And you look at the library's mission and vision and capacity to help sort these out. So here's some resources for doing that. The Aspen Institute did an action guide a few years ago, which talks about community conversations and how to engage with the community on these questions. The Harvard Institute, as I mentioned, has some tools. They worked with the American Library Association, the ALA, to create this Turning Outward Tools for Libraries, which you can download for free. And then the Vermont Department of Libraries Professional Collection has some strategic planning and community engagement resources that you can take out through interlibrary loan. In addition to strategic planning, and as you are doing strategic planning, if you are engaging the community in these conversations, you are actually doing advocacy work too, because you are letting the community know that you're listening and you're engaging with them. And that in and of itself is an advocacy effort. But as you create an advocacy plan for your board and for your library, what you're doing is you're figuring out a plan for how to talk up your library and the impacts it is having in your community and the needs that it is meeting, and helping other people tell their story about the impact of the library for them, and you're engaging them and doing advocacy work with you. And you're creating hopefully some really great talking points that you can use for various groups that you meet with and that others can use on your behalf. In addition, as I mentioned before, you're soliciting patron stories to share. How has the library changed your life, and what do you love about the library? And having your patrons in your community answer those questions so you can use those answers in the advocacy work that you do. As part of this presentation, I have a bunch of different ideas for working together with people in your community and for talking about how the library benefits the community. And I'm going to share these now. And these are all ideas that I have collected from libraries around the state that I wanted to pass along to you to see if they make sense for your library to be using as talking points as well. So community needs assessments. The library's engaging with that is a way of working together with others in the community. Also, any community-wide initiatives will be important for the library to try to engage in, and to work as a trustee board and with your director to assess what community-wide initiatives are currently happening or look to be in the pipeline, and how can the library be engaged with that, because the library really is a connector in your community, and you want to make sure that the library isn't forgotten about when people think about things like developing farmers markets or developing plans for how to address a need in your community. The library probably should be a part of that in some way. As a connector, you can help people connect resources, connect with each other. And so figuring out how you can be involved in that, even economic development initiatives in your community, figuring out how the library can be a part of that. The library is a place where people conduct research and get information. And so telling other community resource providers that the library is a place where they can leave information, or learning about different social service agencies so the library can connect people to those agencies. That's an important thing that libraries do naturally that can be part of your advocacy efforts, is pointing out what community connections you have and how you can help people do research and disseminate information. Other benefits the library offers. Libraries do serve as a community hub, as I said, bringing the entire community together, no matter your socioeconomic status, your political status, your religious affiliation. Everyone uses the library, and it's a natural place for democracy to happen, for people to see each other and engage. The legislature of Vermont has put in state statute that libraries are essential to the proper functioning of a democracy. And so for folks who really believe in the power of democracy, the power of information, the power of people of liberty, you could talk about how libraries support that, how libraries protect privacy, how libraries protect access to information. You can talk about that as part of your advocacy efforts. You can also talk about the library as a space. Despite the fact that we are in COVID-19 pandemic right now, you can talk about how in the past, library has been a space for people to gather, and how you're working towards making it a safe place for the future for people to gather, for all sorts of educational, social, cultural, and recreational engagement. You do have a place, and how it's used depends on your policies around your meeting room space, or just use of the library in general. But you can emphasize that space, that taxpayer-funded, taxpayer-supported space, is something that the public can use for various uses. Also, the library, for many of you, especially if you're a municipal library, you are a way that taxpayers connect with local government. As a department of the local government, every time people come in, they're interacting with their local government. And people may not see it that way, but I think especially with the select board and town administration, it can be a benefit that you talk about. In many libraries, more people come into the library than visit the town clerk's office. So if the town clerk's office is closed and the library is open, is there a way that a partnership could happen there? And if renewable energy and recycling and green thinking is important in your community, you might want to have as part of your advocacy plan how libraries are the ultimate renewable resource. The community pools its resources together, and the library allows the community to afford some more expensive things, resources that individuals might not be able to access individually or might not want to spend their money that way. But by pooling our money together, we can provide that access. And also the libraries buy a copy of something that everyone can use. So rather than having everyone buy a book and then having it gather dust, we get to share these resources. And for people who are really interested in return on investment or ROI, you can talk about how the library is a fantastic return on investment. We pool our money together, and with that, we can access a much wider range of things that then we can access individually. And you can use this link to the library value calculator to input the library's usage statistics over time. And you can compare that against the per capita support of the library versus what people get back for that support. And in most libraries in Vermont, that ROI is huge. So a few more advocacy resources to help you learn how to do advocacy and to give you some more tips. United for Libraries Power Guide is a really great training resource. I encourage you to check it out. The Turning the Page Library Advocacy Training is a pretty intensive advocacy training that I took when I was library director and found very effective. One tip, just as an example, that the Turning the Page training gave me was when you talk to the select board, use the word taxpayer as opposed to the word patron, because taxpayer is their language and they're more likely to hear what you're saying if you use their language than if you use your own lingo. And then this tribute, when I was a library director, I had the library patrons come in and volunteer to allow me to record them answering the question about why the library is important to them and how it has affected their lives and how it's impacted them. And I put a bunch of those recordings together into a 60-second tribute to the library, which I showed the select board, and it was a powerful statement from the taxpayers telling the select board the importance and the impact of the library's work on their lives. And it got the patrons, their own taxpayers, doing the advocacy work for the library rather than having me or the trustees do it. So I encourage you to check out that video and consider doing something similar for your community. Hopefully these resources and this information were inspiring for you and educational. Feel free to reach out to me as always with emails or phone calls, or invite me to your trustees to do a training on this. I would be happy to talk more about any of this. Thanks for joining me.